We're looking at selected passages from several books dealing with the fall of Judah, the city of Jerusalem. These last days of Jerusalem and the kingdom of Judah really make a complicated story. Judah was caught between Egypt to the south and the Babylonians, who are invading from the north. Babylon had defeated Assyria in 612 BC and was expanding rapidly. They would eventually conquer Egypt and establish an empire that ran from the Persian Gulf up the Mesopotamian Valley, through Syria, and back down to Egypt, along what we call the Fertile Crescent. Visualize it as going from Detroit up the east coast of Michigan, across Traverse City and Petoskey, and back down the west coast, heading towards Chicago. Eventually, you would get down to Saugatuck and Douglas. They would look insignificant on a map, but they would have to be conquered because they were in a strategic spot. And the kingdom of Judah, as small as it was, held a strategic spot at the southern end of the Fertile Crescent. So in the passages we're examining today, we see how Judah tried to play off Egypt against Babylon, switching sides from time to time, depending on who appeared to be winning. The Babylonians first besieged Jerusalem in 597 BC. They set up a puppet king and removed some of the leading citizens of the city, taking them off to Babylon. The prophet Jeremiah had warned his people of what was going to happen, but they ignored him. In one of the most dramatic scenes in the Old Testament, the king of Judah seizes Jeremiah's book of prophecies and has it read to him. As the scroll is unrolled, and you need to understand the scroll is made up of separate pages which are glued together, and the scribes would write about this amount of material on one page and then move to the next page. So as the scroll is being unrolled, the king takes a knife and cuts off each page and tosses it into a fire. Jeremiah has to go back and dictate the whole thing again to his scribe Baruch, adding new material to that second edition. In 587-86 BC, the Babylonians took Jerusalem, pillaged the city, burned the temple, and carried most of the population into exile. Some of them returned in the 530s when Cyrus and the Persians defeated Babylon. Others from Jerusalem, including Jeremiah, escaped and went to Egypt. And this begins what's called the diaspora, or the scattering of the Jews. Some of them never returned to Judah. We find large Jewish communities in Mesopotamia and Egypt for the rest of antiquity. In the book of Lamentations and in some later Psalms, we hear them mourning for the lost city, as we do at the end of what we'll read today. So let's turn our attention now to these passages. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord his God, and did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke the word of the Lord. He also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who made him take an oath in God's name. He became stiff-necked and hardened his heart, and would not turn to the Lord, the God of Israel. Furthermore, all the leaders of the priests and the people became more and more unfaithful, following all the detestable practices of the nations, and defiling the temple of the Lord, which he had consecrated in Jerusalem. The Lord, the God of their ancestors, sent word to them through his messengers again and again, because he had pity on his people and on his dwelling place. But they mocked God's messengers, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord was aroused against his people, and there was no remedy. So in the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, marched against Jerusalem with his whole army. He encamped outside the city and built siege works all around it. The city was kept under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. By the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine in the city had become so severe that there was no food for the people to eat. The word came to Jeremiah from the Lord when King Zedekiah sent to him Pashur, son of Malchijah, and the priest Zephaniah, son of Maaseiah. They said, "Inquire now of the Lord for us, because Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, is attacking us. Perhaps the Lord will perform wonders for us as in times past, so that he will withdraw from us." But Jeremiah answered them, "Tell Zedekiah, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I am about to turn against you the weapons of war that are in your hands, which you are using to fight the king of Babylon, and the Babylonians who are outside the wall, besieging you. And I will gather them inside this city. I myself will fight against you with an outstretched hand and a mighty arm, in furious anger and in great wrath. I will strike down those who live in this city, both man and beast, and they will die of a terrible plague. After that, declares the Lord, I will give Zedekiah, king of Judah, his officials and the people in this city who survived the plague, sword and famine, into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and to their enemies who want to kill them. He will put them to the sword. He will show them no mercy or pity or compassion. I have determined to do this city harm and not good, declares the Lord. It will be given into the hands of the king of Babylon, and he will destroy it with fire. Then the city wall was broken through, and the whole army fled at night through the gate between the two walls near the king's garden, though the Babylonians were surrounding the city. They fled toward the Arabah. But the Babylonian army pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho. All his soldiers were separated from him and scattered, and he was captured. He was taken to the king of Babylon at Riblah, where sentence was pronounced on him. They killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. Then they put out his eyes, bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Babylon. On the 7th day of the 5th month, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, commander of the imperial guard and official of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. The whole Babylonian army, under the commander of the imperial guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem. Nebuzaradan, the commander of the guard, carried into exile the people who remained in the city, along with the rest of the populace and those who had deserted to the king of Babylon. But the commander left behind some of the poorest people of the land to work the vineyards and the fields. So Judah went into captivity, away from her land. How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow is she who once was great among the nations. She who was queen among the provinces has now become a slave. Bitterly she weeps at night. Tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers there is no one to comfort her. All her friends have betrayed her. They have become her enemies. After affliction and harsh labor, Judah has gone into exile. She dwells among the nations. She finds no resting place. All who pursue her have overtaken her in the midst of her distress.